Everyone calls matcha Japanese. I've spent years sourcing matcha straight from Japan, and even I had this wrong. Matcha wasn't actually invented in Japan, it was invented in China. But China let it kind of disappear. My name is Christian, and I run a tea brand called OnewithTea. In the next few minutes, I want to walk you through three things: where matcha actually came from, how it almost disappeared, and why a decision made centuries ago is still sitting in your bowl today. No lecture, just a part of the story most people never hear. The story begins in China, more than 1,000 years ago. During the Tang Dynasty, tea wasn't steeped the way we think of it now. It was pressed into cakes, roasted, and ground into a fine powder. Grinding tea into powder, the thing we tend to treat as quintessentially Japanese, was happening in China centuries before it reached Japan. And even then, tea was never only a drink. It was something you slowed down for, a small pause built into the day. Then came the Song Dynasty, and this is where it gets familiar. The Song took that powder, put it in a bowl, added hot water, and whisked it into froth. Whisked powdered frothy green tea. That is what we know today as matcha. It existed in China as a refined art long before Japan had a word for it. And it became the high art of its time, actually. Song Dynasty drinkers held tea competition judged on the color of the froth, the whiter the better, and on how long the foam held in the bowl before it faded. The Emperor Huizong wrote a treatise on tea and judged the contest himself. People gave the bowl that much attention because they felt it was worth attending to. So how did it get to Japan? Largely through one man, a Buddhist monk named Eisei. In 1191, Eisei came home from studying Zen in China, and he brought two things with him: tea seeds and the practice of whisked powder tea. So he planted those seeds, and he taught the method, and he tied the whole thing to Zen Buddhism. He didn't really bring home a beverage, he brought home a way of kind of paying attention. Tea as a means to stay awake and clear through long hours of meditation. He even wrote a book about it. Around 1214, he presented a work to the shogun, the Kissa Jojoki, which roughly means drinking tea for health and well-being. One of the first Japanese texts devoted entirely to tea. That was a novelty at that time. And so the practice we think of as ancient and Japanese actually arrived in Japan as something borrowed from China, carried by a single monk a little over 800 years ago. And then something really remarkable happened. The country that had invented or came up with this practice of matcha and spent centuries refining it into an art slowly let it slip away. When the Ming Dynasty came to power, the imperial court set aside the labor-heavy compressed cakes, and Chinese tea culture drifted towards loose-leaf steep tea, which most of the world still drinks today. Whisked powder tea fell out of fashion, and then out of memory, until within a few generations, a practice that had shaped an entire era was all but gone from the place that created it. What stays with me is what happened next. The country that had only borrowed the practice was the one that chose to carry it. Japan held on, built an entire ceremony around it, the way of tea is what they call it, chado, and slowly set about improving the leaf. Here's Japan's real contribution, not the invention, but the refinement. Just like they have refined and perfected so many other things, matcha was actually one of them. Around the 16th century, tea growers in the Uji region near Kyoto started covering their plants with shade for a few weeks before the harvest, blocking the sunlight, and the plant responds in a way that floods the leaf with chlorophyll with an amino acid called L-theanine, which you may have heard of. Tea has, many biochemical, substances, and it also has caffeine, right? But L-theanine is more the relaxant. Like caffeine is the stimulant, and L-theanine is what relaxes you in the tea. For me in general, like if you compare tea and coffee, which I have another video on my channel that talks about that more in depth, but I feel tea is a more balanced beverage in comparison to coffee. Coffee has more of a yang caffeine energy, versus tea is a little bit more balanced. So That process of shading the leaf is really what gives the tea its vivid jade color and its sweet, savory depth instead of harsh bitterness. It's also what we call umami. And that shaded leaf gets, once it gets plucked, it gets steamed, dried, and the stems and veins are removed. And what's left is called tencha. And once you grind tencha in a stone mill or in an industrial mill into powder, you get what people call matcha. Okay, so when you taste a matcha today, that vivid green and that sweetness, that is originally from China, the tradition of it, the making of it, right? But Japanese has perfected it. Now, that is 800 years of Japanese refinement on top of Chinese invention, and but both things are true, right? So tomorrow morning, when you have your tea or matcha, maybe you think of that and appreciate the ancient history of the leaf. I wish you something delicious in your cup. May you become one with tea, one with yourself.